What if I told you that almost everything you learned about history was designed to make you obedient, not informed? That what we call facts are often just curated stories told by those in power: kings, corporations, colonizers. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's a power play, and it's been happening for centuries, because history is a lie agreed upon. Let's start with a basic truth. History is written by the winners, but it's not just that. It's packaged by the elite, sold to you as education, and reinforced through pop culture, religion, and media. In most Western countries, history textbooks are written by a handful of companies: Pearson, McGraw-Hill, Houghton Mifflin. These publishers don't just print books, they decide what gets in the books. And guess who their biggest client is? The government. That means politicians and school boards, with their own biases and agendas, approve what your kids learn. In some US states, slavery is referred to as involuntary relocation. Colonialism is described as expanding civilization. That's not history, that's PR. Entire civilizations have been erased because their existence didn't serve the dominant narrative. The African empires of Mali, Songhai, and Great Zimbabwe? Barely mentioned. Matriarchal societies that thrived for thousands of years? Gone. The brutal genocide of indigenous people across the Americas? Softened, skipped, or spun. And don't get me started on ancient tech. Why are there pyramid structures on every continent? How did ancient people move 100-ton stones with no cranes, no wheels, no steel? And why are those questions dismissed instead of investigated? It's almost as if the official story is a little too convenient. You're taught that history is just dates and events, but in reality, it's emotional conditioning. National holidays reinforce patriotic myths. Hollywood glorifies war, demonizes enemies, and whitewashes heroes. Museums showcase sanitized artifacts but rarely question how they were acquired. Religion is used to frame conquest as divine will. History isn't neutral, it's weaponized. It tells you who to admire, who to fear, and who to forget. Ask yourself, who benefits when you don't question the past? Corporations benefit. If you don't know how resources were stolen, you won't question wealth gaps. Governments benefit. If you believe there are always the good guys, you'll keep paying taxes and sending sons to war. Religions benefit. If their version of history is the only truth, they control morality itself. Truth is dangerous to empires. That's why it's buried. Let's talk about the stuff we weren't supposed to ask. Why did the Library of Alexandria really burn down? And who stood to gain from erasing centuries of knowledge? Why are there documents from ancient China and Rome referencing civilizations we've never heard of again? Why do we still parrot the idea that Columbus discovered America, when maps of the Americas existed in Europe and Asia long before 1492? Why were entire indigenous oral traditions dismissed as myth, while Greek mythology was elevated to the status of classical literature? Why is it that when indigenous people speak of sky gods or beings from the stars, we scoff, but then obsess over ancient aliens documentaries as if they're revolutionary? Here's another one. Why is the role of women in history either erased or minimized? Powerful queens became temptresses, scientists became assistants, warriors became myths. The deeper you dig, the more it becomes obvious that what we've been told isn't just biased. It's deliberately engineered. Let's also not forget how language itself shapes our understanding of the past. When we say things like settlers or founding fathers, we obscure the violence. Settler sounds cozy, but what does it really mean? Invasion, colonization, erasure. There's a reason conspiracy theories thrive. It's not that people are gullible, it's that official narratives have burned them before. From the Tuskegee experiments to the CIA's involvement in coups around the world, trust has been broken. So when someone asks, what else are they hiding? Can you really blame them? Let's go darker. Why do we still teach World War II as a tale of simple good versus evil when Western companies like IBM and Ford were doing business with the Nazis? Why is the role of the Vatican during fascist regimes conveniently forgotten? Why were Nazi scientists brought to America under Operation Paperclip and given prestigious positions in NASA and medicine instead of prison? Why do we praise the Enlightenment but forget that it happened during peak slavery and colonialism? Why are the horrors of the Belgian Congo, where millions were mutilated and killed under King Leopold's rule, barely mentioned in classrooms? If the Holocaust is rightly taught in schools, why not the Herero genocide in Namibia? Or the Bengali famine orchestrated by British policy? Let's take this further. Why were dozens of post-colonial leaders in Africa, Asia, and Latin America mysteriously assassinated or overthrown, just as they tried to nationalize resources or reject Western banks? Why did the US and its allies constantly install puppet dictators during the Cold War? Why were school children taught about the Red Menace, but not about the CIA's role in destabilizing democracies? What about the role of pharmaceutical companies in rewriting medical history? Natural remedies, traditional medicines, entire systems of indigenous healing were dismissed as superstition, not because they didn't work, but because they couldn't be patented. Modern medicine, while life-saving, is also a business that rewrote centuries of healing wisdom in the name of profit. Let's talk about education itself. The standardized curriculum model didn't exist to uplift the masses. It was created during the Industrial Revolution to produce obedient factory workers. Bells, uniforms, rote memorization. It wasn't designed to expand minds. It was built to train compliance. And what's the best way to ensure obedience? Feed people a version of history that makes them feel small, helpless, and grateful. Let's get personal. Think back to the first time you were taught a historical lie. Maybe it was hearing Columbus was a hero. Maybe it was celebrating Thanksgiving without ever hearing the word massacre. Maybe it was learning about wars and tidy timelines without the screams, the starvation, the civilian carnage. These stories were your first taste of filtered truth, propaganda packaged as tradition. What about the monuments? Why do we still see statues of known racists and murderers in public squares? Why do some people defend them as heritage when they're monuments to oppression? If statues of dictators fell in other countries, we'd call it revolution. But in the West, we call it vandalism. Ask yourself why. Why are some of the bloodiest imperial powers still seen as symbols of order and civility? Britain, Spain, France, empires that stole land, lives, and resources, now romanticized in films and museums. Their crimes are buried under polished narratives, national pride, and royal pageantry. History is also shaped by omission. Why don't we talk about the thousands of resistance movements that rose and fell, the rebellions crushed before they became revolutions, the voices silenced before they were even heard? There is no lack of heroes in history, only a lack of permission to remember them. Now ask yourself, if our understanding of the past is that warped, what does that say about our present? If we glorify conquerors and silence the conquered, how can we ever build justice? Every generation inherits these lies, and unless we unearth them, we unknowingly pass them on. You can't trust a history written by people who needed you to stay silent. The truth is uncomfortable. It should be. But discomfort is where awakening begins. When you question the official version, you're not being difficult, you're being awake. This isn't about rejecting all history, it's about challenging the version you've been handed. Follow independent historians, read from multiple cultural perspectives. Question what you're told, especially if it feels too neat, too noble, too heroic. Talk to elders. Oral history often holds more truth than any textbook ever could. Dig into banned books, compare timelines, notice the gaps, the contradictions, the silences. Truth is often found in what's missing. And most importantly, stay curious, because the truth isn't always in the books. Sometimes it's in the cracks they tried to cover up. Share this if you've ever felt something was off about what you were taught. And drop a comment. What's one truth from history you no longer believe?